Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us in the third plenary session of MEDays 2015. Our subject today is a very relevant, newsy, and important subject. We will be, our great panelists and guest speakers will be addressing issues concerning global energy outlook. And we will be talking about oil prices, volatility, instability, decrease in prices, all the instability, all these fancy words that we talk about. Is it a proxy war? Is it a weapon? Is it used to intimidate the oil prices? Is energy nowadays a weapon to intimidate, bring about change, or just simply marketplace and supply and demands that direct this issue? To discuss these issues, the organizers have lined up a great group of panelists. And I am honored to be joined today by the former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, Mr. Kamal Kazi, and also a prominent figure in MEDays, the Secretary General of Avec, Mr. Abbas Al-Naqi. And joining us today also from the Kingdom of Bahrain, Mr. Khalid Ibrahim Al-Fadhala. He is the chairman of the Dirasat think tank in strategic studies. And it wouldn't be MEDays if I don't have on the panel my friend Mark Ellenbogen of Global Panel Foundation. Thank you very much, and please join me in welcoming our guest. Before I proceed and ask Mr. Naqi to give his 5 to 7 minutes presentation, which I would ask every member of the panel to do, I will open the floor later on for Q&As. Global energy outlook, is it a proxy war weapons, instability, decrease in oil prices? Is it slowing down global economy? I remember 4 years ago, not in this place, every time we attended a panel or appeared on television to debate issues concerning energy and oil prices, we had some convincing speakers saying that oil prices will never go down below $100. And they make a good case. Look where we are today. Is it that people are failing to predict, or is it so volatile, or is it simply entering an era whereby the unexpected is the guiding principle and it's so difficult to predict what is going to happen? Recently, people are talking about proxy war weapon. Is oil prices being used to intimidate, bring about change in your adversary's policy, or just simply the marketplace is dictating and the supply and demand oil prices? To discuss and cover all these issues, as I told you before, we have a great group of speakers, and I won't take a lot of your time, and let me proceed first to Mr. Naqi. Please, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for introduction. And before I answer your question, just let me say a few items and points regarding the oil situation. And first of all, also, I would like to thank Mr. Ibrahim Al-Fadhala for inviting me to be here for the third or fourth time to meet such a distinguished guests and people here around this session. Thank you very much once again, and also to the organizing committee for their excellent and hospitality that we have met since we arrived in Morocco. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And very briefly, within the time allocated to me, and I will just to focus on some important points. Recently, the oil market shows, thank you. Recently, the oil market shows a little change in the world oil demand areas and markets. For example, Asia Pacific is now accounting for about 34% of world oil demand, compared to 29% 10 years ago. Chinese economy is downturning for the last, right now, after 3 decades of continuous growth, average averaging 8% per annum. The current and future supply and demand pictures dictates that all types of energy sources, conventional hydrocarbon supplied and non-conventional sources, will increase to meet the increasing demand also. Amongst the most important recent developments in the international energy market has been development of unconventional resources, in particular shale and gas shale gas and shale gas tight oil. The results are changing the U.S. energy industry landscape, leading to a resurgence of U.S. oil and gas production and bringing local gas prices to historical lows. In fact, there are some legitimate environmental economic with the specialized techniques used to the extent that some countries already ban hydraulic fracturing. Ladies and gentlemen, regarding the price volatility, which is one of the items of the theme. In recent years, the oil market has been characterized at times by rapidly fluctuating price levels. In fact, the market increasingly started to accept price volatility as the new normal. One of the most important changes that the oil market witnessed recently is the drop in oil prices after nearly 5 years of stability. Oil prices are at their low levels, and their volatility at their highest level since 2008 and 2009. The length of decline has been the longest in the last 3 decades, i.e. since January 1986. The latest cycle has been driven by a combination of surging supplies and until recently weak demand growth. Over the period 2011 to 2013, the oil market was characterized by relative stability, with the yearly OPEC reference basket price ranging between 106 and 110 US dollars per barrel. The stability extended to the first half of 2014, with basket price average of 105.3 barrels per day, US dollar per barrel. During the period, and that market stability came to an end when oil prices started to fall as of July 2014, with the monthly basket price dropped to less than $60 per barrel in December 2014, compared to $10 per barrel in June of the same year. This year, 2015, started with a further drop in oil prices to 44.4 US dollar per barrel for the basket in January, but recovered to reach about $60 per barrel during May to June of this year, before falling again in October to reach $46 per barrel. 2 more minutes. Okay, against the background of the coincidence of unexpected growth in non-OPEC oil supply with unexpected lower world oil demand growth was mentioned as the principal factor behind the fall in the oil prices among the other factors. Okay, since I have only 2 minutes or 1.5 now, let me go to the global energy outlook. By looking at future prospects, energy demand is projected to increase by 60% by 2040. Fossil fuels still the main source of supply to satisfy most of the world's energy needs, as their contribution in the energy mix will still be around 80% by 2040. Oil will retain the largest share for most of the period to 2040. Oil demand is projected to increase by 0.5% annually over the period 2012 to 2040. Turning to the supply outlook, it is estimated that the annual increase in the world oil supply is expected to increase from 90 million barrels a day in 2013 to 111.3 million barrels a day in 2040, representing an average of 0.8%, with share of 55% of the world's proven oil reserves and about 30% of the world's crude oil production. And the MENA region will remain as the main supplier. MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa will remain the main area for exporting countries. And just one few words regarding the answering your question, Mr. Chairman. I don't think the oil prices and these things are, whether it is a war or proxy or something like that. But this is my personal view.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Oil itself as one of the economical factors and elements that it depends on the economies and the policies. So both are interrelated to each other. As you know, and the economical and political are the same. Two faces for the same coin. That's what I want to say. There is no war or a proxy war behind this. Thank you very much and for this.
Thank you, Mr. Naqi, for your insights, and I'm sure we will have you will be given the chance to answer questions from the crowd. And our next speaker is Mr. Kamal Kazi from the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, sir. I would like to look at this issue of oil, gas, and pipelines from a political perspective. What are the underlying causes? How do if you look at the wars today in Syria and before that in Iraq, Libya, how is it just a coincidence that these are oil-producing countries? These are one of the topmost, at least Iraq, Libya, Syria in a different case, as a pipeline route. They get affected by the conflicts. They say, there's a saying that behind every war, or behind all wars, particularly in the last 2 decades, there are the oil, gas, and pipelines are not far away. Iraq, we know what happened to Iraq. Now, Prime Minister Tony Blair has come publicly to apologize all the mistakes that were done.
How many times he has apologized so far? That's number 5.
Well, this time it has been more formidable. And not only that, George Bush Sr., the president, who in fact was architect of instability in Middle East, starting with the first Gulf War. He has in his autobiography come up very harshly on Dick Cheney and Ronald Rumsfeld. And he's said they've been, he's horrified by their role, that dangerous role that they played during his son's presidency. So, all these conflicts are, not really just, come by themselves, but there are underlying causes. Syria, we know that there was a plan to have a pipeline from Iran, Iraq to Syria, and ultimately going to Europe. There was afterwards a counter proposal, a counter pipeline that was Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey. Now, these 2 competing pipelines, first one started 2010, and then the second one also came soon after, when President Assad, he he was not willing to take the other pipeline. He was more for the Iran-Iraq pipeline. The conflict in Syria acquired very sinister proportions. I mean, this is a coincidence that this is 2010 and 11 we are talking, and this is when the real conflict in Syria aggravates. Then we see foreign fighters, about 30,000 of them. Suddenly, how do they emerge? Of course, it all started in Iraq, when the decision makers, the occupying authorities in Iraq, they decided to disband the Iraqi army. 300,000 people were suddenly turned out of job, angry, humiliated, and they provided the fodder for the extremist organizations. And eventually, the withdrawal, US withdrawal from Iraq coincides with the conflict in Syria. 2011, US forces withdraw from Iraq, and 2011, the conflict in Syria aggravates, and these all kinds of terrorist organizations, they move into Syria. And then again, there are these organizations. I mean, how is it possible? For instance, if we see how Mosul fell, it was defended by 30,000 Iraqi troops, and there were 600 to 800 band of terrorists who took over, and the 30,000, troops of Iraqi army surrendered, and surrendered in such a miserable way. They surrendered 2,300 Humvee vehicles, rocket launchers, all kinds of equipment that 3 divisions of army were supposed to have. How is it? Iraqi army and Iraqi nation is a battle-hardened nation. They had 2 wars, Iran-Iraq war before, and the war, war of 1991, and then eventually 2003, is a battle-hardened nation. How could it, 30,000 troops surrender to 600 to 800, band of people? What is a very mysterious thing. Again, every time there is a surrender, same thing happened in Ramadi last year, this year rather. And then even if the so-called, Syrian army, rebel army, trained outside by outside countries, they carry with weapon, and this happened a few months back, 70 troops, 70 people who crossed into Syria from Turkey. And all what happened, as soon as they cross, their weapons are taken over by the terrorist organization and given safe passage to go back. This is too much to see that the terrorists are so powerful. First of all, who is financing these terrorists? What is their ideology? What is the source of that ideology? For instance, in our country, we have seen proxy wars, and we paid a very big price for it. Afghanistan was a proxy war between 2 superpowers. We got into it, and our country has never been same afterwards, and it continues till today in different forms, different shapes, and different ways of evolution. So we know what are the proxy wars and what happens to the countries which participate in these proxy wars, and how devastating it is for the people. We never knew what is terrorism, but then again, now we are one of the countries' worst sufferers of terrorism. So I think the countries should be very careful in the region that it is, there is always a political rivalry in a region, and there's always commercial issues, but there are certain boundaries which need not be crossed. And that is particularly more applicable to the oil-rich areas of Middle East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kazi. And now from Bahrain, Khalid Al-Fadhala. He is from Bahrain, a member of the Gulf Cooperation Council, which we read a lot that Saudi Arabia and that council is leading that war to bring down oil prices to intimidate Russia. We heard a lot of theories about if the Saudis are really behind and the GCC countries did that strategy to intimidate Iran and Russia, or to some extent to stop the US from exploring alternative energy sources. So his presence today, other than he is the chairman of Dirasat, is very relevant and newsworthy to this subject. So please, Mr. Al-Fadhala, the floor is yours.
Thank you. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إنه لمن دواعي سروري المشاركة في أعمال هذا المنتدى الدولي الهام الذي وضع نفسه على خارطة الفعاليات العالمية المؤثرة، وأنتهز هذه الفرصة لأقدم كل الشكر والتقدير لمنظمي المنتدى، وأخص بالذكر الأخ إبراهيم فاسي الفيري رئيس معهد أماديوس على دعوتي للمشاركة في أعمال المنتدى، والذي ينعقد في ظل تحولات استراتيجية بالغة الأهمية تمر بها منطقتنا، والتي وإن اختلفت في تفاصيلها وسيناريوهاتها وأطرافها إلا أنه يجمعها عنوان واحد، وهو حالة التأزيم المزمنة، والتي تمثل تحدياً لكافة القضايا، ومنها بالطبع قضية أمن الطاقة. ويسعدني أن أشارك في هذا المنتدى بورقة مختصرة تحت عنوان أمن الطاقة في الشرق الأوسط والخليج العربي بين الواقع الراهن والتحديات المستقبلية، والتي سوف تضم 3 عناصر رئيسية. أولها عوامل تنامي الاهتمام الإقليمي والعالمي بقضية أمن الطاقة. ثانياً أسس الرؤية الخليجية للحفاظ على أمن الطاقة العالمي. ثالثاً التحديات التي تواجه أمن الطاقة في منطقة الشرق الأوسط والخليج العربي بعد عام 2011. أولاً عوامل تنامي الاهتمام الإقليمي والعالمي بقضية أمن الطاقة. ينبغي بداية التأكيد على أن الطاقة تعد أهم العوامل التي أسهمت في تطوير الحضارة الإنسانية، كما أن تطور الدول وقدراتها على تنفيذ خططها التنموية يعتمد على الطاقة. من ناحية ثانية، فإن أي تهديد لإمدادات الطاقة يعني تهديد الاقتصاد العالمي على نحو خطير، حيث كانت الطاقة ولا تزال أحد أهم المحركات الرئيسية لاقتصادات الدول. وعلى الرغم من أن هناك العديد من مصادر الطاقة، إلا أن مصادر الطاقة الأحفورية المتمثلة في النفط والغاز لا تزال لها موقع الصدارة في أسواق الطاقة العالمية. وانطلاقاً مما سبق، فقد أصبحت قضية أمن الطاقة إحدى أهم القضايا الرئيسية التي تثير الجدل والنقاش، ليس فقط على الصعيد الإقليمي بل على الصعيد الدولي، بالنظر إلى الأهمية الاستراتيجية للطاقة بالنسبة للمنتجين والمستهلكين على حد سواء، وذلك انطلاقاً من عدة عوامل، منها ازدياد اعتماد الدول الأوروبية على النفط والغاز، فضلاً عن زيادة استهلاك الدول الناشئة للطاقة مثل الهند والصين، بالإضافة إلى التوقعات التي تشير إلى مسألة نضوب الوقود الأحفوري والجدل بشأن التحول المناخي، وتزايد اهتمام الدول بالطاقة النووية للأغراض غير السلمية، كما تشمل العوامل الأخرى التهديدات المسلحة لإمدادات الطاقة، سواء من خلال هجمات إرهابية أو عبر القرصنة، وبالإضافة إلى عدم الاستقرار السياسي في عدد من الدول المصدرة للطاقة، ناهيك عن محاولات بعض هذه الدول استخدام أو إساءة استخدام إمدادات الطاقة كسلاح سياسي. ومن ثم فإن ما تشهده المنطقة العربية من تطورات منذ عام 2011 وحتى الآن، والتي رتبت نتائج أمنية بالغة الخطورة، منها محاولات الجماعات دون الدول السيطرة على آبار النفط أو أحياناً تدميرها، قد أعاد قضية أمن الطاقة إلى دائرة الاهتمام مجدداً، آخذاً في الاعتبار أن منطقة الشرق الأوسط تستحوذ على 40% من الإنتاج العالمي للنفط، 60% من إجمالي الاحتياطات العالمية. ولا نبالغ القول أن قضية أمن الطاقة كانت محدداً أساسياً لمضمون ومسار العلاقات الدولية عبر عقود، حيث تسعى كل من الدول المنتجة والمستهلكة للحفاظ على هذا المورد الحيوي، بما يحقق الاستقرار وتوازن القوى، لأن سيطرة طرف ما على منابع النفط لا يعني فقط تهديد المصالح الاقتصادية للدول الكبرى، ولكن الإخلال بميزان القوى الإقليمي. ثانياً، أسس الرؤية الخليجية للحفاظ على أمن الطاقة العالمي. يؤدي قطاع الطاقة دوراً محورياً في التنمية الاقتصادية والاجتماعية في الدول العربية عموماً ودول مجلس التعاون على نحو خاص، بالنظر إلى ما يمثله ذلك القطاع من إسهام في الدخل القومي لتلك الدول، حيث تعتمد الدول العربية على النفط لتلبية أكثر من 97% من الطلب المحلي على الطاقة. وانطلاقا من ذلك فإن منظور دول مجلس التعاون لأمن الطاقة ينهض على 3 أسس. أولاً، أن النفط سلعة استراتيجية لا يجوز العبث بها، وبالتالي لدول المجلس مصلحة أكيدة في استمرار تدفق النفط للدول المستهلكة، وقد اتضح ذلك خلال الأزمات المختلفة التي شهدتها الأسواق العالمية نتيجة أزمات المنطقة، حيث لعبت المملكة العربية السعودية ودول مجلس التعاون دوراً مهماً في تأمين احتياجات الأسواق العالمية من الطاقة. 2. ترى دول المجلس أن أمن الطاقة هو مسؤولية جماعية بالنسبة للمستهلكين والمنتجين معاً، لأن الطاقة تعد سلعة كغيرها من السلع تخضع لعوامل العرض والطلب، وبالتالي فإن فكرة تحقيق كل دولة لأمن الطاقة بشكل فردي أمر غير ممكن في ظل التداخل الشديد بين اقتصادات دول العالم، فضلاً عن أن نقل تلك السلعة يمر من خلال أنابيب العديد من الدول، وهناك حاجة ماسة لوجود تعاون وثيق بين الدول لضمان مرور هذه السلعة الاستراتيجية دون معوقات. وتجدر الإشارة إلى تشكيل دول المجلس قوة بحرية أطلق عليها اسم مجموعة الأمن البحري 81 لحماية الأمن البحري لدول مجلس التعاون، ومنها الحماية من تهديدات أمن الطاقة. 3. على الرغم من أن أمن الطاقة له جوانب عديدة، فإن جل تركيز دول المجلس كان على ما يسمى بأمن الإمدادات، أي توفير الطلب العالمي على الطاقة دون انقطاع وبأسعار في متناول الجميع، وهو ما يطلق عليه السعر العادل، بما يعني أن كافة الأطراف الدولية مطالبة بالحفاظ على توازن أسواق النفط العالمية. ثالثاً، التحديات التي تواجه أمن الطاقة في منطقة الشرق الأوسط والخليج العربي بعد عام 2011. التحدي الأول يتعلق بالعوامل الطبيعية المتمثلة في انخفاض أسعار النفط بشكل غير مسبوق، وهو الأمر الذي كان له تداعيات سلبية على اقتصادات دول مجلس التعاون التي بدأت في تنفيذ برامج الترشيد الإنفاقي للحكومات وإعادة ترتيب الأولويات بشأن الخطط التنموية. وقدر صندوق النقد الدولي قيمة خسائر دول مجلس التعاون جراء انخفاض أسعار النفط بحوالي 300 مليار دولار في عام 2015، كان أكبرها لدى المملكة العربية السعودية التي تعد المصدر الأكبر للنفط في العالم. أما العوامل غير الطبيعية فتتمثل في تحدي الإرهاب، وخاصة الجماعات الإرهابية المسلحة التي يطلق عليها الجماعات دون الدول، حيث تمثل تهديداً لكل من المنابع والممرات على حد سواء. أخيراً وليس آخراً، فإنه من الخطأ اختزال قضية أمن الطاقة في تغيير الأسعار هبوطاً أو صعوداً في الأسواق العالمية، إذ أن المسألة أشمل من ذلك بكثير، فهي قضية عالمية تعكس معنى الأمن بمفهومه الشامل، ومن ثم يجب أن يتعاون الجميع المنتجين والمستهلكين للحفاظ على أمن هذه السلعة الاستراتيجية. ولن يتحقق ذلك سوى باتفاق الأطراف الإقليمية والدولية على نزع فتيل الصراعات والأزمات التي تشهدها المنطقة، والتي أتاحت الفرصة للجماعات والكيانات العابرة للحدود أن تصبح طرفاً من أطراف ذلك الصراع، فضلاً عن أهمية تضافر الجهود الإقليمية مع نظيرتها الدولية لحماية ممرات النفط، حيث لوحظ أنه في حال نجاح جهود مكافحة الإرهاب في البر فقد يلجأ للعمل في البحار، وبالتالي ستكون ممرات نقل الطاقة الهدف الأول لتلك الجماعات الإرهابية. أشكركم على حسن الاستماع. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
شكرا Mr. Al-Fadhala. Before I give the floor to Mark, I have a question for you, Mr. Al-Fadhala. عندي سؤال لك قبل ما أتوجه إلى مارك ألنبوغن. إذا كان صحيحا بأنه الهدف من الإبقاء على أسعار نفط منخفضة ومتدنية هو الضغط على إيران وروسيا، هل لمستم في مملكة البحرين أن انخفاض أسعار النفط أثر على تصرفات وسياسات جارتكم إيران؟
طبعا
لك فرضيا في حال كان الهدف
الانخفاض مثل ما ذكرت عالمي يعني، وذي الأسعار يعني عدم ثباتها على سعر هو جزء من أمن الطاقة، لأن أمن الطاقة يعتمد على ثبات الأسعار وعلى حماية المنابع والإمدادات. فإحنا في البحرين يعني أقل تأثراً من جيراننا في دول مجلس مثل
هل أثرت هذا انخفاض الأسعار على سلوك وسياسات إيران؟ لأنه يعني أحد العناوين هذه الجلسة أنه هل يستعمل النفط كحرب بالواسطة من أجل تأثير على سياسات الدول الأخرى؟ هل شعرتم بأن هناك تغييرا في سلوك وسياسات إيران نتيجة انخفاض أسعار النفط؟
احنا بالنسبة لنا يعني البحرين مع إيران احنا ماشيين على سلوك معين من زمان يعني، فالنفط ما أعتقد غيرت عقيدة هاي السلوك يعني.
Excuse me, Mr. Naqi, you had an intervention. Before I go back to you, Mark, please.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. في الحقيقة يعني ما تفضلتم به لا أعتقد أنه يعني بالنسبة لتخفيض الأسعار يعني الذي حصل له أي توجيه سياسي يعني. حتى في البداية لما نزلت الأسعار قبل حوالي سنة كانت هناك بعض المقالات صدرت في بعض الجرائد الأمريكية بالذات، وبعدين خذتها وسائل الإعلام الدولية والعربية بالذات، عمدت أو ذكرت بأن السبب الرئيسي هو يعني كنوع من تخفيض الأسعار هو نوع من الضغط على بعض الدول وبالذات على روسيا وعلى إيران. يعني هالكلام اللي قالوه في ذاك الوقت الكلام هذا غير صحيح بالمرة يعني من الناحية السياسية، وإنما الأسعار يعني كان الهدف الأساسي من تخفيض هو شيء طبيعي يعني مثل ما قلنا قبل قليل بأن مثلا الموضوع خاضع لموضوع العرض والطلب ومدى توافر هذه المادة في الأسواق. لكن أيضا في نفس الوقت كان الهدف الرئيسي من الحفاظ أو عدم زيادة الإنتاج من قبل دول أوبك هو الحفاظ على الماركت شيرنج، يعني الحصة السوقية لهذه الدول التي لو كانت الأسعار مثلا نزلت وبعدين خسرت هذه الدول كان يعني تنتقل هذه الحصص من الدول المنتجة للنفط المصدرة حاليا إلى دول أخرى مثلا. فكان الهدف الأساسي هو الحفاظ على الحصة السوقية أو الأسواق البترولية.
شكرا. Now I leave the floor to Mark Ellenbogen. You will have, I'm not going to ask you any questions right now. We're going to go straight to your presentation because you will be grilled like usual by a lot of tough questions. So please use your 5 to 7 minutes.
Well, many of you have heard me before, I think, over the years in different capacities as a vice chair of the Democratic Party or as an ambassadorial nominee or as an advisor to president. And I had to think how I want to do this, but I'll take Minister Kazi's bait because I think the gorilla in the room is how the United States behaves on these issues. But, you know, the fact is, every one of us, every one of our countries is selfish about this interest and this issue in some way. Why? Because, of course, we're all concerned, as they've all talked about, and I don't have to talk about it more, prices, how this affects when you have to fill tanks or airplanes or cars, and the technology today is simply the fact that most of our things are run by oil. And, of course, then we're dealing with a future, and a future where we know that oil is going to be less, that it will no longer be around in the way it is today, and that we are looking for alternative sources, whether it's in the US case, and the general is right, to make ourselves energy independent. We began to go for shale, fracking, which is very controversial amongst environmentalists. And of course, we now rejected the pipeline from Canada, which I personally disagree with, and I'm not speaking for the government, because of course, in my way of thinking, I would rather be reliant on Canada, because I like the Canadians and I trust them and I think they're honest brokers, than to be reliant on a lot of other countries. And then of course you've got the interplay between the superpowers and the regional powers, from China, who has its own interests and whose country is growing and is factually going to be the country that has the largest energy needs, and Russia, who is the greatest detractor of this, if you don't count Saudi Arabia and some other countries, but clearly they are going to have big problems. They know it. They're already trying to deal with it. So while we're living reality and we're dealing with the technology of today, we're of course at the same time trying to focus on where this technology is going to go to. How long is it going to take us to create fission? How long is it going to be until we have clean energy, or energy from, manure or vegetables, or solar energy, wind turbine? I mean, there's so many, and trust me, I'm not an expert, so I need to be a little careful not to sound like I know exactly what I'm talking about. But as a former military person, of course, I understand that a great deal of the energy goes to us in our capacity to, as Minister Kazi said, to run our wars, some of which we've done particularly badly. Although I disagree with him that we shouldn't have gone into Iraq, what I disagree with is the management of it afterwards and during. And he is absolutely right. You can't remove hundreds of thousands of people from ministries and then expect to have a country function, which of course contributed to the problem with oil, and there are several things that happen in a parallel reality. So what does the future look like? I don't really think we know. I will tell you that the energy policy of the United States will be to continue to be self-sufficient, to continue to frack. It's, of course, one of these questions because fracking is quite expensive. So as oil prices are high and the cost per analysis that people who deal with fracking price, then it makes sense to frack. But of course, as oil prices go down, the cost of fracking is too expensive. So there's some balance there for the United States. Also, as you all know, I think, most of our ships, battleships, submarines, are run by nuclear energy. And I think nuclear energy will continue to become a growing part of the world energy stage, despite the concerns of Fukushima and other places. Number three, wind energy will clearly become a more and more important player. The oil companies and the big gas companies have very little interest in this, but it will be there. And then we'll deal with a series of other sources that we probably won't even live to see, that our children's 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 mothers, sisters, brothers, whoever will see someday. So the conflict in this question, when you ask this question, are there proxy wars about energy? Absolutely, and we all know it. But that doesn't mean that the conflict was started for that reason, which is, of course, what Minister Kazi has implied. The United States did not go into Iraq to become an oil supplier. It went in to topple Saddam Hussein. We happened to do it badly. We succeeded. And in the process, we've gotten the mess that we now have. Iraq's a mess. Libya's a mess. Yemen's a mess. Syria's a mess. I mean, if I was President Obama, excuse me, Mr. President, you'll probably fire me, I would say we'll take 1 million refugees in America. Why am I talking about this? Because it's all interrelated. You cannot talk about energy without talking about military, without talking about industry, without talking about the consequences of the wars surrounding issues of energy, which of course have caused the problem that we have today with refugees. We saw millions of people coming into Lebanon. We didn't want to see it. Millions coming to Jordan. We didn't want to see it. All of a sudden, it's at Europe's doorstep. Oh, now we have to worry about it. And the consequences of what we do is the issue here that I'm most concerned with. And what do I leave, before I pass off, in my ideas about the future? Number one, we absolutely know that gas and oil, well, certainly oil will disappear. I don't know what the timeline is. These gentlemen know much better than I, and they'll either agree with me or say that I'm an idiot. Number two, we will continue to look for alternative ways to find energy. That includes energy security and energy efficiency for ourselves, the United States, as every other country will do. We will also have partnerships and try to do things together. Minister Kazi talked about, well, he didn't name them by name, South Stream, North Stream, Nabucco, and of course those all fell victim to different political games. The principal thing, though, is how we, on the one hand, live our lives now, knowing that we need fuel and knowing that we need gas, so oil and gas, because that is mostly what the planet is still run on, vis-a-vis how we wean ourselves from that for the future. Of course, there are vested interests that have their idea that that shouldn't happen, but it will happen, and that's acknowledged. So the question is how much we will use, how quickly it will take for us to change, and what things will take place between then, and that question I can't answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Before you turn off your mic, I have a quick question for you. Since you talked about, the U.S. and how
Yes.
the ramifications of low oil prices, is it safe to say, or maybe it's premature to conclude, that pursuing a energy policy less dependent on Middle Eastern producing countries and pursuing other sources, alternative energies, shale oils and what have you, the main reason why the United States nowadays is perceived as pulling out from the Middle East?
Well, I'll answer it this way. When President Obama ran for president of the United States, he had a fundamental policy. His policy is the U.S. should be recusing itself from the kinds of paradigms that were occurring during the Bush administration. I am personally a person who is proactive. Most military people are. It's a balance. So that philosophy has been the genesis of our pulling back from different things. And then, of course, different issues occurred. One of them being the fact that we then said, look, we now have an opportunity to be security and oil reliant, so let's do it. So I don't think it's quite as simple as the way you're trying to put it. I don't think it was ipso facto the United States pulled out of the Middle East, pulled out of interacting because of these issues. I think that was a philosophy that the president has wanted, and it's taken 6 years, like a super tanker needs a kilometer or a mile to stop for us to get to the point that this is now happening. I happen to disagree with that policy.
Last question. I'm using my privilege as the moderator to ask you the question. Did low oil prices impact and affect the decision by oil companies to slow down producing oil from shales?
Absolutely.
It did?
Yes.
Is that put on hold for a while or just
I don't know. You know, I'm not an oil expert, and I don't work for the oil companies. So I don't know what their thinking process is, but it seems to me quite clear that as the oil prices are dropping and therefore the costs of producing shale outweighs the benefit of it, excuse me for not speaking in economic terms, that they've put a slowdown. How long that'll be, I don't know. I think some of these gentlemen could answer that question better than I can.
Thank you very much, Mark.
You're welcome.
And now I open the floor for Q&As. Anyone who has a question, please state your name, your affiliation, and I urge you to make it a really a question, not a presentation. رجاء الاسم اسم المؤسسة أو التي تمثلها والحفاظ على أن يكون هناك سؤال وليس مداخلة أو محاضرة حتى نستمع لأكبر عدد ممكن من الموجودين بيننا. نعم هنا gentleman right there please.
Thank you. Usama Mrabut, student of management in University of Tangier. My question very briefly. In your opinion, what will be
لمين السؤال? Who you want to answer?
Challenge all the panelists. In your opinion, what will be the equal price? What the equal price for either consumers and producers of oil? Thank you so much.
I think Mr. Naqi is in a better position to answer that question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your question. First of all, this is my personal views. Always I say there is no fair price for oil. There's reasonable prices, because when you say a fair price, that means that this is the fair price, may not be acceptable to the consumer or to the producer. So there is a reasonable prices for oil, and it is very difficult to determine a certain price, whether it is fair or reasonable for oil. And it's being changed from time to time. If we remember, 40 years ago, it was about $6 or $5 per barrel, and then it moved to 13, 14, and 20 to 30, and then it moved to 80s and to 140 last, and then it dropped to about around 40s right now. So there is no fair or reasonable prices, but the price is, which is maybe acceptable to both the producer and the consumer, that is which does not harm the economies of the either producers or the consumers. Because also the oil companies, and as you know, oil companies, when they make their projects, they make their projects and based on a certain prices, and that price should not be less than at that time, sometimes 18, 20, 13, or 40, and so it is different. We cannot say there's that price should be, but there's a range sometimes. We can put a range from 40 to 60, from 70 to 80, from 100 to 110. We can put ranges, but not a certain one single figure for all prices.
Thank you very much. The gentleman right here, please, and you're next.
Jawad Kardoudi, Institut marocain des relations internationales. Alors j'ai deux petites questions. Monsieur Kazi semble dire que tout ce qui se passe au Moyen-Orient, ce sont des guerres par procuration, sans qu'il précise quelles sont les puissances qui sont derrière ces guerres. Je voudrais qu'il précise sa pensée et qu'il nous dise à quel pays il pense pour cela. Ma deuxième question à M. Naqi, devant la baisse du prix du pétrole qui semble à long terme, on ne parle pas d'une remontée des prix à court terme, est-ce que les pays du Golfe ne vont pas eux aussi s'acheminer vers les énergies renouvelables? Merci.
Well, you know, we all have consensus that oil and gas are strategic commodities. Whenever any commodity is a strategic commodity, there is always more politics surrounding it than market economics, you know, market mechanics. The power balance in Middle East, particularly in the Middle East, I mean, you know, we talk in the Arabian Peninsula mainly, by and large, which is the main oil-producing center of the world. I mean, 40% of the oil is produced in that region. We see, particularly, I mean, this trend started after the revolution in Iran, that oil became, I mean, you know, factor and of, I mean, it was not entirely oil, but basically started with politics. I mean, Iranian revolution has a certain outlook, which did not suit the conservative countries of the area. So then it proceeded into, I mean, more and more getting into oil being used as a strategic weapon. Iran-Iraq war was part of that strategy to subdue Iran. And then after this war ended, you see, again, a different dynamics there. When certain countries went up to Iraq and they said, well, we lend you money during the Iran-Iraq war, we financed you, we want the monies back, you know. And then we want certain adjustments in the borders or recognition of the borders, say particularly between Kuwait and Iraq. And that's where the things went sour. So in Iraq, I mean, Saddam Hussein was not a great statesman. I mean, he was kind of a leader of his own kind. He went rashly into Kuwait, and that led to eventual destruction of Iraq. Iraq is now, today, I don't think it will ever be the same country that we saw in the 90s. You know, it's going to be totally fractionalized. We know Libya, the eastern part of Libya, which is oil-rich, I mean, having a different political dynamics than the other parts of Libya. Gaddafi, whatever he was, he's gone, but Libya is in tatters. Now, Syria, again, this is a crucial factor of power balance and pipeline route. I mean, two competing pipelines were in race, and Qatar is one of the, Qatar and Iran have the largest gas field. They share the South Paras gas field, which is the largest, one of the largest gas fields in the world. They share, because there were sanctions on Iran, so Iran could not exploit that gas field, and it was done only entirely by Qatar, which through the gas exports, through LNG and other, I mean, it had a great day. Now, suddenly now, when sanctions are lifted over Iran, Iran is a player in the market. So it creates a certain tension. There were two pipelines, as I said, one coming from Iran, from the South Paras gas field, and other coming from Iraq, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. So this was at the root of the conflict. Now, really, there's another factor which is we all in the Muslim world are very concerned. There are 1.5 billion Muslims all around the world. Now, we know our history that Damascus, Baghdad, Cairo, Mecca, Medina have been centers of our civilization. Now, whatever happens in this area, it really affects everybody, 1.5 billion Muslims anywhere. And that is a very important aspect. Then the power balance in the region, if you see all big historical countries, Iraq is totally now destroyed. Syria, again, everybody knows that it's not going to be the same Syria that we know. It is destroyed. Libya is destroyed. The power balance has shifted into, oil-producing countries which are, don't have large population, which are oil-rich countries. Now, it is similarly, if you look at the situation from a strategic point of view in Europe, for instance, if European defense and security doctrines were laid down by Luxembourg, Monaco, or Andorra, what will be Europe instead of France, Italy, and Germany, Spain? What kind of Europe we are going to have? So in Middle East, again, the dictates of power are coming from oil-rich countries of Middle East, and the big centers of power have gone totally into the background and facing a deep crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Kazi. Now the answer for the second question, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, again, and also thank you for the question. With regard to the current low price levels of the oil, of course, it will affect in the long run the economies of not only the GCC countries and also oil-producing countries, and also, I believe, some developing countries which depend on some aids and assistance from the oil-producing countries, and mainly from the GCC countries. So that will be affected if the prices are as low as they are right now in the long run. This is number one. Regarding the to be transferred to the shifted to the renewables, yes, many GCC member countries and also OPEC member countries or OPEC member countries, they did, and they put their plans for the years to come also to be transferred to the renewables, such as the solar energy, such as wind and geothermal and all those kind, and also that kind of renewables being applied for the time being in many countries in the GCC and in North Africa, as you know, and in many other oil developing countries, not only because due to the low prices, and also because we believe, and Mouafac and OPEC, we believe that that kind of renewables are a complementary energy being added to the traditional or conventional energy, such as fossil fuel. And as you know, fossil fuel is oil, gas, and coal. So these three kinds of energies being added to the renewables, so that makes, because there will be, all studies say and refer that there will be a great demand in the energy in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Naqi. Please, gentleman right there.
My name is Ibrahim from the Czech Republic. Speaking about uncertainty and instability, my question is dealing with the relation between Russia and Europe. Because on Russia, some sanctions were imposed, and also the oil prices is a tool, a political tool. So, and I believe that we need now Russia to have on the board. So my question is, if you are capable of commenting the situation of the oil price as a tool for maybe in the changing atmosphere and for today, maybe for having Russia, so maybe in a positive way engage in the solving the problems, because Russia is facing both sanctions and the oil prices. For anyone from the panelists.
Mr. Kazi, you want to answer that? But please, they're making their questions short, so please make your answers brief.
Well, again, in Russia, we realized that sanctions on Russia started after the situation in Ukraine. And that also coincided with the lifting of sanctions, possible lifting of sanctions on Iran, with the following the new settlement of nuclear issues with Iran. So both situations, you know, they coincide in with certain gaps. And so this is again a factor that if Iran was going to export oil, it should not have the same benefit as the others were having before the lifting of sanctions. Similarly, Russia, which is very oil-dependent exporting country, energy, should pay a price for its actions in Ukraine. That is another aspect of it. I mean, so clearly this is a political, issues which are underlying the, energy prices and energy, outlays.
Thank you. Please, go ahead. Please.
Je suis président d'un think tank marocain qui travaille en Chatham House. Et je voudrais poser une question à M. Marc Ellenbogen concernant justement, pour rebondir sur la question du gaz qui transite par l'Ukraine pour l'Union européenne, l'Occident. Il y a actuellement un acharnement entre...
Et la question est...
Oui, j'arrive. Entre l'Occident... J'en arrive. Monsieur Harb. Entre l'Occident et donc la Russie, justement, pour ce problème de transfert du gaz russe pour l'Occident. Donc, il y a une guerre des gazoducs. On a le South Stream, on a le Nabucco, qui est soutenu par Bruxelles, et le Transcaspien, qui est un autre gazoduc qui va transiter par la Caspienne. Actuellement, les Russes semblent en avance pour contourner l'Ukraine à travers le South Stream. Les Américains sont pragmatiques par nature, donc je voudrais vous poser la question de savoir, puisqu'ils ont dénoué la crise avec l'Iran, ne peuvent-ils pas être encore plus pragmatiques pour essayer de comprendre que dans l'intérêt de la planète, il faille s'entendre avec la Russie pour justement continuer à alimenter de façon naturelle l'Ukraine et l'Europe.
He got the question. Thank you. Please. Thank you.
Well, it's funny that you should ask that, because in fact at breakfast, Deputy Prime Minister Svoboda and Minister Kazi and I were talking about this. Personally, I'm much less antagonistic towards Russians, probably because I was born in Germany, as you know, than many USers are. But I have to say, one of our biggest concerns is Mr. Putin. And frankly, it's very hard for us to deal with Russia in a normal way when you have a megalomaniac as the president of that country. So that's my answer.
Sure.
So yes, I would deal with the Russians differently, but it's a complicated thing
We
for
don't
us.
have a lot of time, so please let's have two questions right here, and then I will ask the rest to ask all the questions, and then we'll have the time to answer all of them. Please go ahead, and brief.
I'm Khalid Benamou. I'll be chairing the panels after these sessions. I have a quick provocative questions that was raised in the Senate, in the Foreign Relations Committee. Basically, the whole map of the region has been laid out based upon the oil. As we are transiting from oil to other sources of energy, gas and renewables, and the region is faced with transnational threats like ISIL, and we see all that. My question is, do you think that the region, do you think that countries like Syria, etc., are going to be able to go back to the map that they had before? Do you think that the map of the region will remain, or you think that this is something from the past? This is a provocative question.
Who do you want the...
I'm raising it to the panel.
You said Senate, and Mark, you're probably in a better position to answer that question.
Yes, of course. No, Syria will not go back to being what it was before, and that's the answer.
Please. Yes, sure. We'll have a last-minute answer for. But please, let's go here and have as many questions as possible.
Mohammed Hamidouche, vice-président de l'Académie diplomatique africaine. Je voudrais surtout orienter votre regard vers le continent africain. Nous sommes en Afrique et nous n'avons entendu les panélistes que parler des États-Unis, de la Russie.
On ne va pas changer le sujet. Alors,
très bien.
S'il vous plaît, la question.
Voilà. Donc, la baisse tendancielle des prix auxquels nous assistons sur le marché a des implications dramatiques sur les pays africains exportateurs de pétrole, notamment des pays comme le Nigeria, qui, avec moins de ressources financières, ne pourront pas faire aux défis sécuritaires pour lutter efficacement comme Boko Haram, etc. Des pays voisins comme l'Algérie, n'est-ce pas, connaissent une situation dramatique parce que tous les programmes d'investissement de ces pays, qui étaient basés sur un prix du pétrole d'un certain niveau, se retrouvent obligés de réduire leurs programmes d'investissement, etc. Je vous remercie.
Who would take that one? Mr. Al-Naqi, do you have, or Mark, who's poised to answer that question? Or just, we'll take more questions, and then every panelist will have 2 minutes to wrap it up.
There's
Please
5
quickly,
questions. Maybe we can just have them each ask.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Jeff Porter. I'm with North Africa Risk Consulting. I've got I think a fundamental question which addresses the theme of the panel. The market consensus is that oil prices are going to be depressed probably for the next 5 to 7 years. Historically, oil-producing countries, hydrocarbon states, have not had a lot of avenues of political participation for their populations. Think Saudi Arabia, think Qatar, think Kuwait, think Algeria. The question for the panel is, as oil prices remain low, will the social contract that existed between the governments of hydrocarbon-producing states and their populations collapse? And as a result of that collapse of the social contract, will there be an increase in democratic participation, or will there be an increase in political repression?
We got that question. It's a very important question. I don't think we have enough time to address it. But who wants to take that one quickly right now? Mark, Mr. Naqi, do you want to talk about this social contract between countries and their population as a result of low prices? It's a very tough question.
I mean, Jeff, given what's happened in Iraq and in Syria and in Egypt and so on, I think it's unlikely to morph into the kind of participation one would expect in North American context. But I think what you're talking about is the fact that these countries will certainly use the opportunity, I think, to be less draconian.
Thank you. The gentleman in front, please.
Hello. Hassan Lahlo, African Business Development Chairman. My question is for Mark or Mr. Al-Fadhala. We have been hearing lately that ISIS is selling oil to some countries, and this is kind of risky that some governments, I don't want to say maybe the rumors on the newspapers are wrong, but how are they financed, ISIS, I mean Daesh, which is legally not a real state and legally not Islamic because they are doing some murders in mass. So how are they financed, and who is buying oil from them? Thank you.
Thank you. before we answer that question, the lady behind you, please pass on the mic, and then I go back there. Please, the lady. Oh, no, not for you. For you. Okay.
No. My question to Mr. Mark. I'm Nabil Adil from ESCA School of Management. Are you stating that the US went to war in Iraq on the basis of false claims that that country had weapons of mass destruction without thinking about the aftermath? And don't you think that the US should be held responsible on the mess that it created on purpose or not in the region?
Thank you very much. Next to you, please. The lady next to you. You have a question there? And the young man on the back, please.
Oui. Oui, bonjour, je suis Madame Roudiès-Guédira, je suis professeure économiste à l'École nationale d'administration et présidente d'une association nommée Nebta Maroc pour un entrepreneuriat social et durable. Je remercie les intervenants et je continue dans la même lancée que le collègue tout à l'heure. Effectivement, je ne veux pas paraître féministe, ce que je ne suis pas, mais effectivement, les premières victimes de ces guerres par procuration sont tout de même les femmes. Et les femmes africaines, je pense particulièrement au Mali, qui se sont élevées avec leur voix. Donc ma question c'est, ne pensez-vous pas que les puissants de ce monde doivent se préoccuper, ou comment se préoccuper plus des gens au-delà des enjeux miniers, des enjeux pétroliers et géostratégiques de ces guerres? Merci.
Merci. I think Mr. Kazi will answer your question because Pakistan is in a better position. He understands the impact of oil prices and low economic growth on women. But right now, let's take more questions, and then we'll sum it up, all of us, for 2 minutes. And in the back, please, go ahead.
My question is addressed. The U.S. in the future of...
Repeat that, please.
Okay. The U.S. seems to be planning a future of an environmental-friendly source of energy. Yes, Mr. Edinburgh seems to bring up fracking, which, as we can see from the news, is harming U.S. citizens who are present in the cities where fracking is taking place. So my question is, what's the plan with moving on with fracking, and what are the precautions that will be taken in the future?
And last question right there. And two more questions, 1 and 2. Go ahead, please.
My name is Yassim Siddiq. I'm a student in master's degree in international management in the faculty of FAS. My question is to Mr. Mark. When are we gonna be leaving the United States confident about talking about Syria and Iraq? We are sorry about the Iraq situation, but we are sorry also about
question, please.
Syria's situation. When are we gonna leave the United States confident about destroying countries and coming back to say that things are not gonna change?
Thank you very much. We got the point. Last 2 questions, please. Make it brief.
I study in engineering at Sous University. My question is for Mr. Kazi and Mr. Fadhala. So, Mr., when you see other Arabic countries suffering from wars, and while the prices are low, why don't you help these countries with weapons?
Thank you.
Last
very
much.
question in the back, please. Last question. Please. Each one of us will have 2 minutes to wrap it up, please.
Je vous remercie pour vos interventions. Je suis Ala Boushaba, je suis titulaire également d'un master en management international. Ma question, elle est toute simple. Est-ce que nous n'avons pas ici, ne sommes-nous pas en présence de la moitié de la balance? L'autre moitié représentée peut-être par les Iraniens, les Russes, n'ont-ils pas une opinion différente? Et ne sommes-nous pas ici en présence des probables futurs alliés de la Troisième Guerre mondiale?
Merci, monsieur. Mark, we'll start with you. 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, and then we'll wrap it up for the next panel.
Hassan, how is ISIS financed? In the first part, it was the West ignored it. Syria financed them to be against the opposition. Saudi Arabia and Qatar financed them to export Wahhabi Islam, and the Turks financed them to go against the Kurds. Whether that included financing oil, I can't say. And like the US in Afghanistan, they lost control. So that's the answer. False claims. Did we go to war because of false claims? I don't want to answer that question because I actually agreed with the war, and by the way, I was in Iraq. Do I think we managed the aftermath of it well? No, I think we did an absolutely abysmal job of it. Does that answer your question? And will we learn from it? Probably not. Are the biggest casualties of war women and children? Absolutely, it's disgraceful. You know, ma'am, every time I used to order my forces in to do things, and I had to write the letters to the families saying, I'm sorry, I can assure you I didn't celebrate, and I'm sorry for that. And I really apologize to all the women who have died under my leadership, and children too, too many people. Fracking environment, yes, it's a conflict. Do I agree with fracking? No, but I agreed to it because of an economic strategy. I think the environmentalists have plenty of good arguments, but currently we're ignoring them in favor of security policy. When will the U.S. be confident about not destructing things? Well, President Obama has actually taken a step backwards. Of course, you will say no, given that we use missiles and my brain isn't functioning.
And drones.
Yes, thank you. Drones, I should know that, shouldn't I? Good thing I studied at the academy. To do our proxy wars, and it's not working. So I think the U.S. will continue to want to come in, and of course it'll always be a conflict that sometimes you want us present, sometimes you don't want us present, and we won't know from our perspective.
Thank you, Mark.
One other question I wanted to answer. Half of the players, yes, absolutely, it's true. And the Russians and the Iranians and the Chinese have a completely different view on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir Fadhala.
بالنسبة لإجابة الأخ عن تمويل داعش، طبعا تكلم الأخ عن دول اللي تمول داعش، بس أنا خلال كلمتي ذكرت أن أمن الطاقة يعتمد على تأمين منابع النفط وإمدادات النفط. داعش تمول نفسها ذاتيا، لأن داعش أول ما طلعت احتلت منابع النفط وبدأت تسيطر على إمدادات النفط بعض الأنابيب، ثم باعت النفط في السوق السوداء بأسعار ما نعرف شنو الأسعار هذه. فأعتقد أن داعش للآن يعني مصفاة النفط في بيجي أكبر مصفاة في العراق تم احتلالها من قبل داعش، وللآن يتحاربون على منابع النفط وإمدادات النفط. فأعتقد داعش تعتمد يعني في جزء كبير من إمكانيات المادية على إمدادات النفط المحتلة من قبلها يعني.
Thank you very much, Mr. Al-Naqi. Please, if you have any last thoughts you want to give to us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. But as we know that geopolitics is one of the major factors which affects the oil prices. But we, neither in our organization or myself, we do not deal with politics.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come back to you with an answer, with a question, but differently stated. Go ahead.
Well, I'd like to respond to the question on strategic balance. How do we restore the strategic balance in the region? Now, as we see that, region had existed in the 70s. Iran was there. There was a certain element of competition or even kind of under the surface rivalry. But everybody existed, and there was not a violent attitude to each other. Unfortunately, that situation has changed very basically. If we look at the Arab issue, the main Arab issue from 1948 was Israel. Now suddenly we find there is no Israel issue at all. Iran nuclear threat is greater threat than the Israeli nuclear threat. This is a very basic question. Who are your enemies? Whom do you consider as your friend? Who are your allies? Sectarian issue. Now, this sectarian issue, we all are Muslim, many of us, majority of us, we didn't know, we don't know this sectarian issue. I didn't know till I was 12 years old that whether I was a Shia or a Sunni. I was asked this question in school by one of my classmates, and then I didn't know the answer. If he asked me if you're a Shia or Sunni. So I didn't have the answer. I had to go to my grandfather. I asked him, who are we? I was asked this question. So, and my family was a religious family also.
And what was the answer?
And then suddenly now we see that anybody who's Shia is to be killed, or anybody who doesn't subscribe a certain particular stream of Sunni school of thought is not a Muslim, and he should be killed, as we are seeing in what ISS is doing. Now, where does this ISS ideology draw its inspiration? Obviously, it has to draw its inspiration and also finances probably from the countries which share its ideology. This is a very serious question. how has this sectarian issue come up? And I think it's a big challenge for the entire Islamic world to deal with this issue so that ISS, entities like ISS do not come up. Now, in our area, Bin Laden came. Who's Bin Laden? Who brought him? You know.
That's a very existential question. I still have 1 minute. I have a quick question, and I need quick answer from every panelist, starting with you, Mark. If oil prices continue to be low, who are the main losers? Name countries quickly.
Russia, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, actually the smaller producers.
Mr. Fadhala, إذا استمرت الأسعار منخفضة من هم الأكثر تأثراً؟
أعتقد الجميع يعني خسران يا يعني أشوف
أنا أسماء دول
الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية.
Mr. Naqi.
Yes, I believe both the oil producing countries, oil consuming countries, and the people of those countries which highly depend on oil as the sole or semi-sole.
So shales and sheikhs are losing.
Both, all of them. Thank you.
Mr. Kazi. If oil prices continue to be so low, who are the main losers?
Well, the main losers are the countries,
names.
oil-producing countries with greater population. The countries which produce oil but don't have much population, they don't need so much of revenue, so they can make sacrifices. But the countries like, for instance, Iran has 80 million people. They need oil, income very desperately also to cover up the past gap.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for all the questions. Sorry if I didn't have the time. And we'll see you on the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much.